a bit of a debate about whether the forum is allowed to be recorded. It's a public meeting, and I'm being advised that the rules are it's not recordable like other meetings, but it's at the discretion of the meeting. So I'm just going to put it to a vote with everybody, and if you're happy for it to be recorded on camera and everything else, then vote for that. If not, then we won't, and it'll just be recorded in the normal way.
Chair, it's a matter of public right to attend public meetings and record them. If you can show me the rule that you're relying on to disallow recordings, I will happily leave and go home. But you need to show me the rule. Peer pressure does not work on me.
So, right, Claudette, do you want to? Yes, you can ask that, yes.
This is a guidance for the school forum, which is different from the constitution. They're not recorded. Public access, which you will have. But there's no...
It's a public meeting. It's a public meeting. It's a public meeting. That's the common rule for public meetings.
Okay, but it's their decision, so you could yell at them.
It's the law. Allow me to explain my understanding of the situation. This is a public meeting which has a special definition in the UK law. All public meetings, members of the public are allowed to attend and record. You don't need a special dispensation.
So what? So I'm not an expert in this area. There's other people experts. We do need to hold the meeting. So what I propose is we go ahead, we hold the meeting, you record it. However, the recording is embargoed until such time as somebody can give me professional advice.
That's acceptable to me. I'll give you until the end of the day tomorrow. That's a full day of legal reasons.
Sorry, this is a meeting of people, of volunteers, who are coming together to try and help Bristol schools community. And it just feels wrong. So
I think you could just take a vote on it, Chair. It is not an ordinary meeting that follows the Constitution of Bristol City Council. Therefore, the Chair, the forum members are able to determine what happens and how the meeting is formulated. That's what it says. It's good practice to follow the Constitution, so we do. We have the meetings in public. We produce the meeting minutes, the meeting agenda, the meeting reports are published on the website. We give details of the meeting, so should anybody want to watch it when we're doing Zoom, they can do. If they want to make notes, they can do. When we are in person, the same principle applies. They can take notes, they could come, they could listen, because the meeting is in public. Yes? In respect of recording, that is something extraordinary which happens with the business of the council, where council members are making decisions as to the business of the council. Your scrutiny, your forum members who are scrutinising the business of the education department, if you might be saying that, Hannah, and the finance relating to it. So this is set out in the Schools Forum Operations and Guidance in respect of how you proceed. Okay? So if you are happy to be recorded, Dan can record. I can't tell you what happens to the recording when he does the recording. I can't say that. I don't know what medium it's put out on. It's for you as the forum members to determine what you're comfortable with. Check.
okay, so what we'll proceed on those what we said. We'll proceed with the meeting. I will take people's views at the end of the meeting, and we'll see whether we can get any advice on what the situation is.
It says, can you phone me back in a few minutes? I'm just in the middle of
okay, so, right.
Is that okay?
So I'd like to...
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay. Sorry.
Right, you've got to vote, please.
One
Right.
minute, I'm just running that bit down.
Okay.
I'm attempting, apologies. And I need 1 minute, Vic, I will just get you sorted in a few minutes.
Sorry, Mary, can you move that up? Thank you. Ask it if you could hear. Can you move that up the room, sorry, in order for, yeah. It's not brilliant, but if everyone speaks up, Vic should be able to...
Vic, can you hear us? You can.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Okay, right. So, welcome to the meeting. It's really good to see everybody in person. The agenda says that we're going to finish at 19:40. It would be my intention that we would finish before that. So, I think because we're in person and there are a few new faces, shall we very quickly go around the room and if you just introduce yourself and say where you're from and where you represent. So, Alistair.
I'm Alistair Brown, representing early years governors, and I'm the governor at Redcliffe Nursery School, one of Bristol's 12 maintained nursery schools.
Hi, I'm Kate Peel and I am head teacher at Hartford Nursery School and I'm representing the Maintain Nursery School head teachers.
Hello, I'm Mary Cox. I'm Director of Schools and Colleges from Clifton Diocese.
Simon Eakins, representing primary academies, and I work for Cathedral School Students.
Hello, Lee Hannon, representing Maintain Primary. I'm at LA Governor at Braintree Primary School.
Hi, I'm Aileen Morrison. I'm head teacher at St Matthias Academy. We're in alternative provision and I'm representing Cruise and alternative provisions in Bristol.
Hi, I'm Jo Willis. I'm here representing the Diocese of Bristol and all the church building schools in Bristol.
Hi, Cameron Shaw, Principal at Bristol Met Secondary and Fish Ponds. I represent secondary academies.
I'm Christine Townsend. I'm the Executive Member for Children's Services and Education. And in a past life I was chair of this forum.
Hi, I'm Melanie Bunce. I'm representing Maintain Primary Schools and I'm the business manager at Ashley Down and Brunel Field Schools.
I'm Mercha Clark. I'm also Maintain Primary Schools. I'm a governor at St John's Primary and chair of the Finance and Resources Committee.
Mandy Cheshire, I'm representing secondary academies. I'm the business manager at St Bede's Catholic College.
I'm Emma Richards, I'm the head teacher at Claremont and King's Western Schools and I'm representing the Special House.
I'm Charles Shone, Bristol City Council Officer, where I'm the Finance Business Partner for Children Education.
Stephen Godwin, Finance Manager, Bristol City Council.
I'm Sue Coombs, Head of Service for School Partnerships in the Education Department of Bristol Council.
Hello, I'm Esther Messenger, Cathedral Schools Trust, Sam Matt Lead, and I'm representing Academies Primary.
Claudette Campbell, Democratic Services Officer.
Lauren Price, Democratic Services Officer.
Steve Horsby, I'm the chair and also chair of North Star Academy Trust.
And Hannah Woodhouse, Executive Director of Children's Services and Education.
Vic?
Afternoon, Vic Furman, Director of Education for Bristol City Council. Sorry I can't be with you this evening. Had to be in a meeting in London this morning, so I had to try and be in two places at once. So thank you for accommodating me virtually.
Very good. And we've got a couple of people at the back, just so we know who's in the room.
Hello, my name's Daniel. I attend quite a few Bristol Council meetings and I put the videos on YouTube for people who are unable to attend the meetings.
Oh yeah, my name's Jen Smith and the council knows me because you spy on me.
It's a young person.
Yeah.
Oh, all right, okay. Right.
Chair, there's somebody else online.
That's me.
Ah, right, okay.
It's alright, it's me.
And secondly,
I'm here.
can we just check that all of our things say what the group that we actually represent?
I don't know.
Yours must be schools. You said you were a business manager.
Yes.
So you can't be a governor rep.
You can.
Okay. I'm a governor at the school as well.
Ah, right, beg your pardon. Right.
Okay, thank you. Right, so, Lauren, standing business?
Sorry, apologies. So we've got some apologies for absence. They are from Albert Gardner and Sarah Lovell prior to this. I can confirm that the meeting is correct. We have the right people to make the decisions that we need. I apologise for C, that doesn't need to be there because we have a chair and a vice chair, so we only do that once a year. There is a resignation of Trish Dodds. She resigned and there are no new members since. However, we have had interest from some academies that have been formed in January that have come forward, so I will have a discussion with the chair prior to doing that. And we have some current vacancies which we're going to advertise via the Heads newsletter. Again, we haven't had any response from it. They are the primary head in the maintained setting, the primary head in the academy setting, a primary cover, 2 of them in the academy setting, and a special academy. Again, I would ask any of you to contact any of your peers, colleagues, if they wish to come forward for that. And it's just a point to make for the declaration of interest, but point F, that it's just a reminder that the votes that have been taken tonight are on behalf of your sector and not your own setting. That's it. I just need to check with you and members about the minutes of the previous meeting.
Yeah, okay, so we'll move on to that. So, minutes of the meeting went in the pack. Has anybody got any matters of substance and correct record?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Looking at point 5D, the verbal update from Vic, it mentions the outreach service with a budget of £1 million per year to be part of the wider SEND offer for Bristol settings. I wondered if that meant the targeted support fund. Schools aren't, as I'm aware, receiving the outreach service inclusion officers yet. Is that right?
Yes, so they're two slightly different things. So the what's called the Early Intervention Fund has launched, and we did hold our first panel at the end of October, and that is also £1 million of grant funding that we've allocated to that, and then schools that have been successful with that will have been informed as an outcome of that panel. The outreach service is a slightly different offer. It's a part of our early intervention offer to support schools. We are intending to launch that in January with further recruitment to take place over the spring term, so next term, and more information to follow. So I can share more detail outside of the meeting, and we've got a regular slot with head teachers to provide updates through what's called our Head Teachers Connect meetings. So once we can share the model, we've onboarded our colleagues, then we can share more, but that is part of our SEND strategy, and I'm overseeing that piece of work at the moment.
So just thank you for Vic, and thank you for that, Vic, and look forward to hearing more. Just in terms of the minutes, what would be correct? Would it be just to say, share the launch of the new outreach service and will be part of the SEND offering for Bristol services? I guess it's that 1 million reference.
Yeah, I think share the launch of. I think perhaps our proposals to launch, as opposed to it hasn't launched at this point in time, but our plan is to launch that in January. So perhaps a minor amendment in the language on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, got it.
Okay. Right, in terms of actions, I think we've got 2 actions. there was Emma sharing slides to the forum from the last time.
I think they don't know. I'm pretty sure they went with the pack. If not, I will reshared them because I have got them. Yeah, they were shared. They've gone with the pack. Yeah.
And then there was something on hospital education funding, sharing the figures. I think we've got that on the agenda, Stephen. So
we've shared the figures
Sure.
with the clerk, and they should have been distributed.
Yeah, they've gone out as well. They went out with the pack as well. But if anyone wants them again, I'm happy to read them. But I think they're as well. Yeah, appendix 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chair, please can I ask a question on hospital education?
Yes.
Thank you.
It is the next agenda item as well.
Apologies, sorry.
So why don't we go straight on to the next agenda item, which is Bristol Hospital School. So we have spoken about this in the past, and that was talked about in the last meeting. And then one of the members asked some questions about it, so there's been a paper update produced. Does anyone she'll have the paper out. Does any of the council members want to just introduce it, and then if anybody's got any questions on that, we'll take those.
I'm happy to introduce the item. I think this is a more information item in that what we have shared is a copy of the hospital education charging policy, which is compliant with the statutory guidance that's been published by central government, but also follows suit with a number of local authorities who've taken a similar position in the way that they fund and support children with medical needs that are then supported by the hospital education service. So happy to, I suppose, take questions on the paper kind of as read. I think there were some questions outside of forum that colleagues wanted to raise, and we're happy to either answer those here or take those away if we can't answer those in the room.
Okay. So first off, is there any questions anybody's got on this paper? So, yes.
Thank you. I just wondered if schools could be reassured that when it comes to the process with students with EHCPs, if the costing of the EHCP has been made by the school but the funds have not been received into the school, can we just have reassurance that the school therefore won't be charged for the funds then not receiving to put them further into deficit? The time lapse between costing the HCP, which could be the provision map, which funds go to the hospital education according to this, and the time between costing it and then receiving it, schools will be worried about having to pay hospital education when the funds haven't actually come into the school yet. Could we just have some reassurance that that was being acknowledged?
So I think if I've understood your point correctly, so where a child has been granted an education, health and care plan, but the funding hasn't hit your bank account, I think is what you're describing. I think that's probably a specific matter around either the time it might take the council to process payment, or if it's particularly delayed, then ultimately funding that we owe you that needs to then be paid. So it's probably a specific matter between us, and we've got colleagues in finance in the room as well. But there are some schools that have shared delays in funding and payments with me, which we've been addressing some of which are historic and some are more recent. So there shouldn't be a position where you don't then receive that funding in order to be able to pay the hospitals for that funding forward.
Thank you.
That's sufficient estimations.
Thank you.
Vic, so I've been asked to raise on behalf of some secondary heads around the service level agreement. So my understanding is that there's no statutory requirement for a school to enter into a service level agreement with hospital education service, because obviously that's a legal requirement for the local authority to provide that Section 19 provision. Whereas schools have been told that if they haven't yet signed that agreement, the child that's been referred to hospital education provision due to a medical need has been refused access to the provision. So that would leave the child in the middle, if that makes sense. So I suppose the question is that right? And if so, what's the movement forward in order to make sure that that child is not disadvantaged by, I suppose, a lack of agreement between a school and a provision?
So just to unpick that, do you mean an agreement between the school and the hospital education?
Yeah, so it's not my setting. I've been asked to raise it on behalf of some secondary heads. So we are asked to sign a service level agreement with Hospital Ed in order to have one of our children on roll access that provision, which I think is fairly standard, I suppose, when we're looking at alternative provisions. But of course, a lot of the time we're commissioning alternative provisions, whereas I suppose they're slightly unique. Elements of unique, I appreciate, for any members in the room, but the unique things with the hospital aid is that we're not necessarily making the decision to refer. There might be a clinical need, so they might be referred by their GP or by a CAMS worker. We're asked to sign the service level agreement. If a school is refusing to, hospital aid is saying that the child therefore can't access the provision, which obviously leaving the child unable to access the provision because they're medically unwell enough to access mainstream school. As diagnosed by a clinician.
Understood. I might need to take that away with Philippa Scholar, who's the head teacher of. I'm not familiar with appointing their admissions policy around an SLA or contract, but I can also probably appreciate some of the benefits of that almost dual registration position that you'll find yourself in those situations. So can I take that one away and just get a clear answer from Philippa? Because there is an element where obviously we oversee that service, but also it operates as its own alternative provision as well. So I just want to check some of the operational arrangements with Philippa in terms of how that's brokered.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Cam?
Yeah, that was fine. There was another one that was asked to raise more of a note, I suppose, for the record of just the timing of the announcement of the new charges in line with, I suppose, how schools budget set. And I know we did discuss this previously, Chair, around understanding that, giving over a portion of the ALPU is fine, apart from we have to hold that place for the child to return to. So actually the schools are spending their money on enabling that space to exist. The cost doesn't actually go. Every day the child's not in the building doesn't cost less money because we have to maintain the provision for that child to return to. So I think that's some of the sort of concern coming out of the charging is obviously schools being able to actually effectively budget plan for it when they didn't have warning in advance of setting their budgets. That's more of a point of note rather than a discussion. Thank you.
Do you want me to comment on that? I did have a brief discussion with Philippa about the timing and communications, and I've offered some of our support in terms of how we can share that communication better in future. Because I think communication came out directly from the hospital education school directly, and perhaps we might have been able to play a stronger role in making sure that was communicated well and early. So I'm having those discussions with Philippa, but I think she was aware of that bit of feedback feedback when we spoke this week.
Okay, thank you for that, Rick. Okay, we're going to now move on to first of all the dedicated school grant budget monitor, which is the usual sort of update on where we are with finances. Where do you want to? How are we going to do this? Where are you going to be?
Do you want me to just highlight the key elements of the report and just send people through?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the current year, 2024-25 budget monitor as at period 6, during the period to the end of September 2024. It's for information only, and you just asked to note the information, or if you've got any queries, we're happy to answer any questions on it. Essentially, the dedicated schools grant is subject to change in year, primarily for changes in high needs data counts and early years head counts, which are done on a termly basis. So at the moment, as at period 6, the dedicated schools grant allocated to all of Bristol schools and academies and provisions is just over £491 million. It has been adjusted in year already for split site funding, early years head counts, as I've just said, and high needs place changes. That will change again by the time we report this to the next period. It's also subject to academy recruitment in terms of how much money actually reaches Bristol City Council. And up to period 4 in the last report, the net allocation to Bristol was 218 million. It's now 214 because of academy conversions as at the 1st of September.
Sorry, did you say 14 or 40?
214.
14.
Yeah, it's in the report.
Yeah.
In terms of the forecast, we are forecasting an in-year deficit on the DSG of just over £15 million. The gross deficit is just over 31 million, but we have contributions as part of the safety valve agreement with the DFE, and as part of that Bristol City Council's contributions. So forecast net in-year deficit of 15 million. Added to the deficit brought forward from the previous financial year, we're looking to carry forward a deficit of £52 million into next financial year. You'll all know the reasons why, in terms of the pressures on the dedicated schools block, the cost of supporting the volumes of education, health and care plans, the number of children in external high needs provisions. Those are the main areas there. And again, it's the same issues as in previous periods. I've mentioned again the safety valve, which we're now in the form agreement with the DFE, and we look to continue to recover the deficit over a period of time up until 2029-30. So it's a brief overview. The headlines were there, and happy to take any questions, Chair, if anybody has any.
Okay. Simon?
Just trying to cast my mind back to the papers that were part of the safety valve. I think, to me, our position for 24-25 looks like we're about 10 million worse than was presented as part of the safety valve. And there may be some unders and overs, but in that original plan, there was something like £9.5 million worth of savings that we were going to recognise in 24-25. Is it right to assume that it's those savings that haven't yet been materialised because there's a lag in some of those changes? Or I guess the question is, we're already way off the safety valve agreement. Does that have any implications, or not until the end of the programme? And where are we with those savings and those mitigations?
Vic, do you want to come in on that, or do you want me to answer?
I'm happy for you to cover the figures, and then happy to jump in after Steve if that's helpful.
Okay. It's, from my perspective, it's basically a combination of the savings not being achieved because of the delays in developing the in-borough provision, which is all linked to capital strategy, developing resource bases, special school provision, and by doing that we stem the flow of children going into all those higher cost external provisions. So that's part of the issue there, plus significant increases in volumes of demand. We're over and above what was originally estimated in the safety valve agreement. backlogs of the EHCPs coming through the system, and again the high cost of supporting those children with those specific circumstances. It's a combination of delays plus increased volumes of requirements. That said, we are looking to re-profile over the period of the Safety Valve programme, so that we do try to get back on track and have that deficit recovery by 2029. So we're working with the DFE on that, and obviously all of the key partners in terms of developing the provisions, the capital strategies. It's obviously a multi-agency task, but it's a significant task to try and get back on track.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So there is obviously not the savings as anticipated. Is there anything that you can share with us, the projects that have brought in savings or things that have started and are working as planned? Because I think it would be reassuring for the forum to see that rather than wait until the next paper and things have got out of hand again, and what things are implemented that are actually working, that we can maybe support you in making sure that is spread around in our forums that we work in.
Yeah, I think the support of schools is obviously key to all the delivery of this. I think it would be worth bringing the full safety valve reports to the schools forum for information. The reports that go to the DFE that track the progress, the developments, what has been delivered, what's been delayed, and then you've got that full transparency there. But again, I'll refer to Vic because Vic's obviously the lead for the safety valve programme, so you might be able to get more detail.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do, I suppose, is think about this in the round of the broader SEND strategy that we have, which is just included in terms of its consultation, and will then come to the committee in January, so that we're not thinking about these things as two separate areas, because they are inextricably linked. I think the first is we do have a priority in our SEND strategy in terms of building more provision, and colleagues in the council are working on that, but it is behind schedule, so there is a significant amount of work to do to ensure that we've got sufficient places locally. As colleagues in the room will be aware, it will take time to build or refurbish buildings that we think we can use for resource provision or standalone specialist provision. There are a number of schools that have expressed an interest to us as well, where they have available capacity, and we're working with those at the moment to look at what is feasible. So that is a specific piece. I think most of the overspend that we are identifying in the high needs block, which is not unique to Bristol, it's a position for a number of local authorities nationally, is linked to the use of independent specialist providers where we can't meet that need locally. I think a number of those providers are absolutely excellent. They are sometimes of the charitable sector, and very supportive of our kind of overarching vision and work very closely with us. There are obviously some providers that are more in the kind of for-profit space, and obviously we do at points have to use them because they can meet some of that need, but over time we'd like to see less of that use and more of our local Bristol use, and that, in turn that has an impact on the transport as well, in terms of children being able to be educated locally, whereas otherwise they may be travelling. So the capital programme is a real key priority for us. I think the outreach service, which was referenced earlier in the actions, is also a key development for us. We'll obviously launch that in January, but it will take time for them to build the relationships across schools and with SENCOs. We will be deploying a new model in the way that we bring together services to meet with every school in Bristol on a half-termly basis, and that will be part of our early intervention and early support model. And there's more we can do, I suppose, to build the confidence of SENCOs, build the confidence of teachers in terms of meeting more of that need through professional development. So there's a number of I suppose, projects within the SEND strategy which have a link to the financials. I think it's also important to note that about 2/3 of local authorities are experiencing some kind of deficit, either in year or historic debt, on their high needs funding. And we welcome the announcement nationally in terms of additional high needs funding. In the budget, there was an announcement of about £1 billion, which will be spread across local authorities. We haven't yet had confirmation of our allocation just yet, so we have a very broad range, and it will depend how those figures are then distributed. So that will probably come to the next meeting, but that will also offer some benefit to the overarching budget. So there's a number of complex factors within this, but I think it's fair to say under the governance that we have, we've got oversight both from an independent chair, but also within the council to ensure that we've got a grip on the delivery of our strategy.
So Vic, Kate, go on first. Yeah.
I just wanted to sort of bring in, we've been having conversations. So as Maintain Nursery Schools, we come together as a group of head teachers because we need to address the deficit, and we also need to think about how we're sustainable in the future. We are areas of expertise where, when we're talking about early intervention, it needs to start right at early years, not sort of halfway through primary. So we met today with Anna and thinking about how we move forward with that, and went to a conference recently where there were settings that had resource bases within their schools, and they worked really closely in a reciprocal relationship with their local authority to provide those resource bases for children, and it was for nursery and reception age children, because I think for that transition from nursery school to primary can be quite tricky for everybody, and we want to really work with our primary schools and have that partnership where we really have the child at the heart of it. And we have so much expertise in our Maintain Nursery Schools, and we are totally up for that challenge, and we want to have the children in our centres, but it's how we work with that financial system. So we start at 2, so by the time children leave us, they have the HCPs, they're in place, because the length of time it takes for to have paediatrician involvement, etc. So we just really want to be at the heart of this project, really. Finished.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. I think to follow that from Kate, the Multi-Academy Trust send leaders in the city that are coming together regularly at the moment. Would really like to work more closely with the local authority representatives and the Inclusive Education Group, which brings together parents, professional services and SENCOs. Also would like to do that. So just a request really, if in order to share that back through the local authority, that we could have a representative from the local authority join those meetings on a regular basis would be really helpful, so that we know that we need to build more capacity in mainstream settings and want to do that, but it would be great to have a representative of local authority there so that we can work closely together.
Any comments?
I suppose I just wanted to make a couple of comments, which is just to sort of recognise that we have a lot of work to do. We were very pleased to develop the SEND strategy and launch it in this room some weeks ago. The consultation, we'll be bringing it to the committee in January. That's a multi-agency piece of work, and we've got huge support for all the work that we're doing for parent care reform and health partners, particularly from the schools as well. And the scale of the work that you are all doing in the nursery schools, in the specialist or AP settings in the mainstream across Bristol is really, really significant. I also wanted to recognise, I suppose, that parents will be feeling very frustrated about some of the delays to assessment, and I'll speak again Thursday at the Children and Young People's Committee. Christine is really clear that we're transparent about the data, and we will be bringing the data to, as we always do, to that committee on Thursday to do the same. So I suppose I just wanted to recognise that we have a clear strategy now which we're working on, which this funding sits underneath. This fits quite right. What we can't have is a sort of safety valve process over here and a strategy over here. The two are inextricably linked, and we need to deliver it
the capital is, I mean, I won't repeat what Vic said, we're doing that as quickly as we can, but it is a really significant piece of work, and it's very important we do that together. And of course, it'd be really good to join that work, and you know, we can't do enough work, I think, across the mainstream settings on inclusion in Bristol, and I'm really keen to do that, so thank
you.
Do you think that part of that 1 billion that the government announced will be used to support overruns on the safety valve scheme?
I don't comment on that. Not unless we're instructed to. That is the political decision. We don't know how much we're getting, and we don't know whether there's any direction within it. But unless we're directed to use it to cover the deficit, it will be going into services and investment in children.
Harry?
I'm sorry to ask if this has been asked and answered in previous
More questions are good.
Is the strategy looking at where there is a drop in birth rate and therefore surplus places in some schools, which could be re-designated rather than looking at schools closing? Is that part of the plan? Is that considered? It may well have been answered many times. Apologies.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the expressions of interest that we've asked schools for are exactly for that, both where they have space or capacity that you know, perhaps either where they've reorganised or where they've seen a falling role and have become available, and that we can work with them on. I'm also mindful that there is, particularly in primary schools, this broader potential for nursery provision as well, and that's part of the national DFE rollout. So it will be up to school leaders and trusts which provision they'll be looking at and what's feasible for them. But it's a combination of the two, a combination of space on existing schools that can utilise that. We don't have any. I suppose when you're describing school closures, there are some former schools that were closed some years ago that again potentially could be brought into use for this purpose alongside other buildings that may be appropriate for us to use for specialist provision. I suppose what we're looking at is all avenues in terms of what assets do we hold across the city, alongside what spaces do schools have, but alongside the capacity of schools to be able to then support high quality resource provision and make sure that we are. So what we're going through at the moment is a process of redesigning the service level agreement for resource provision so that we are setting out much more clearly how we would expect that to be used, but also the funding that would follow, so that a school can be confident that it can deliver it to a high standard as well. So it's the two things together, not just the physical capacity, but also let's call it the leadership capacity in a school to be able to run high quality provision, and how we can support you with that. I hope that answers the question, though.
On the point of primary schools being able to have nursery age children, what's the kind of process that will help to maintain nursery schools sustainable? Because if a school is going to have nursery, so for example, our nursery school has got primary school next door on the same site. We'd like to have nursery age children. So I think what's the impact of that would be our falling numbers. So, and then that would not keep us sustainable. So I wonder how that process is going to support the maintained nursery schools.
Yeah, I think Sue Coombs in the room as well in terms of early years, but I think the DFE criteria will be about local sufficiency and the balance of sufficiency, not just setting up provision where perhaps there's an oversupply. So that will be factored into the DFE view. I mean, academy trusts will have the ability to apply for that directly. They won't require, I suppose, support from the local authority, but the DFE may test whether the sufficiency question with us as a local authority, given that's one of our statutory duties.
They do. So they will ask us for a local authority view on the need. And of course, if it is an academy, the academy would also need to get a significant change from the regional director, who would also look at sufficiency. So there are a couple of safeguards in place, but I do think it is something we need. Obviously, no, we don't want oversupply, we don't want undersupply. We need to manage that together, as we do the place position. The primary position. So yes, Kate, a little protection.
So we're doing two separate pieces of work, like Cameron and Vic has referred to at the moment, in relation to primary place planning and early years sufficiency as well. So I'm sure we'll engage with the sector on both of those. We're already engaged with the primary place planning, as we are with some early years settings as well, in relation to how that progresses.
Okay, so trying to synthesise some of that. Vic, I heard there's some number of things coming in January. There's the output of the consultation, and you're highlighting the need to make sure that the SEND strategy is integrated, and safety valve is an integral part of that. We may or may know how the allocation is going to work by then, and you're also hoping there's going to be some movements and further announcements on the outreach in January as well. So, all of which can come to the forum. Just on the final point, a couple of people were saying, is there information about safety valve or how it's going? And somebody mentioned that there are reports. Can those reports be shared with the forum? Is there any reason why not? Or how do you propose in future to be reporting?
So, I mean, sorry, I've just jumped on. How do we propose to do it?
No, I told you're in charge, Hannah, so
we have brought the DSG report here, and it's giving the headlines. I'm very happy to provide more detail on the safety valve progress reports that are shared with the DFE. With, I'm happy to bring them here. We will also bring them to the Children and Young People's Committee. So we just need to check that we don't duplicate, but yeah, we can do it.
I think if they're there and it's no extra work and they can be shared, then I think people would be pleased to see them.
Steve,
sorry, hang on.
If I've got a bit of an update at the end, so perhaps if other colleagues have questions, I can do a bit of a roundup at the end as well. I get some other pieces.
All right, thank you. Simon?
Sorry, it's sort of semi-related to that, but I don't think it comes up anywhere else. At the last meeting, we had a bit of an update on the place planning and the work that was going on and the consultations that were going on. I'm conscious that I think the deadline was something like the 9th of December for schools to consult on that. Is there an update on where we're at with that, whether we've all the, because obviously a lot of MATs and maintained schools have to come together in an agreement. Is there a bit of an update on where we're at with that?
Yeah, Sue, I'll probably hand it to Sue. Sue's been leading on this. There's been a really positive and engaging piece of work with schools in localities on this, but Sue, you probably have will be better to present the detail.
Thanks, Vic. We met with maintained schools and Multi Academy Trust. We've identified 3 local priorities and we're working with all schools within those priority areas. So we've sent out communications to all schools across the city as well to engage in the process. And we're now doing individual follow-up meetings with all schools who've engaged in the process and are looking to reduce numbers. So we're in that window at the moment. It's going really well. We've had really good engagement from school leaders, and we're doing follow-up communications as well this week. And we're also doing a briefing for chairs of governors as well this week as well. So we can certainly bring an update to the future meeting.
Jamie?
Thank you. Does that mean that not all schools did engage?
So all schools have had the communication. Most schools who are looking to reduce have engaged with us as a local authority.
But not all.
We've engaged with everyone who is wishing to reduce, and we've engaged with maintain schools, and all multi-academy trusts have engaged as well. Every school that we're looking to reduce that has positively engaged with us.
Thank you. Merch in a minute. So does that mean there will be something in January you can share? Is that time to go?
Yeah, we can certainly give you an update in January, next meeting.
Okay.
Does that indicate that there will be sufficient reduction in the pound with the engagement that you've had?
We're on track, so we'll be able to give a full update in January. But as I said, we've had positive engagement from school leaders, from our maintained schools, but also supported through our multi-academy trusts.
I think possibly to add to what Sue was saying, that this is obviously for looking into the 26-7 year. I think we will need to continue this work as soon as we complete this particular deadline in terms of consultation on any reduction of PAN, very quickly in the spring. Again, need to think about subsequent years with more of a 3-year strategy in this area, because the falling roles, particularly linked to birth rates at primary, the effect on primary will continue. It's a trend that we're seeing in Bristol, but that will also start to flow to the secondary phase of schools, in due course as well. So whilst there's an immediate pressure to make some decisions for this year, and schools are working with us on that, we need to continue working on this as a council.
Okay, thank you. Slightly wider discussion of the DSG budget monitor period 6, but I think it was a really useful one for all of us. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Steve, would it be helpful just to just come back to some of the links around SEND, if it's okay and we have time? I think the couple of points I was going to raise was, we know that nationally there will be some reform, and the government has announced that it will look to reforms in SEND. We don't know what that will look like at this point, but we know that part of that would also be a change in the inspection framework for schools, and this concept of a report card as well. So obviously it's an early point for the government to be able to announce the detail of that, but I suppose just to have on the radar of colleagues that haven't picked up those announcements, there is a bigger national reform, potentially a funding reform, and then obviously we are delivering our strategy within that. So I think this would be a lively debate kind of over next year particularly, and we're linked into the right spaces to be able to have those conversations when that detail comes forward.
Thank you, that's helpful. Okay, right, we'll move on to item 6, which is the dedicated schools grant for 2025-26. So this is sort of the budget for the next period. So Stephen, over to you initially.
Yep, okay, so this is the update as we know for 25-26. Just to flag that any figures throughout the next 3 reports will be indicative until we get final allocations through. You be aware, I imagine, that there has been delays with the change in government, which coincided with the change in the school funding cycle. So at this moment in time, we haven't got the funding settlements or indicative figures for the next financial year. So we're just working through assumptions and principles at this moment in time. This report will take you through what the DFE have released so far in terms of a policy update, and as I say, we've still got some more interpretation and final figures to get through, which we'll have to bring to the January school forum. This report is for information, so we're asking you to note the national funding formula updates and the dedicated schools grant updates for each block, I say based on the information provided. All of this is based on the autumn budget statement from the DFE, from the government, that was announced on the 30th of October. We were issued with an update on the 5th of November in terms of this policy. So it's headline figures at this moment. The big figure there is 2.3 billion additional funding will come into mainstream schools for young people budgets in 25-26. £1 billion of that funding, so not an additional billion, will be earmarked for high needs. Of the 1.3 billion that's left, that will go into the school budgets and will cover the cost of the transfer of grants. So you'll all be aware there's been in-year grants this year. The core school budgets grant, teachers pay employers contribution grant, and teachers pay additional grant. So they'll all be enrolled into the dedicated schools grant. In addition to that, there will be an inflationary element. I'll come on to that in one of the later reports. What isn't detailed yet is that 1.3 billion will also cover the cost of the increases to pupil premium. So we've asked the DFE for any indicative details on that, but we will not release them until the 19th of December when they give us the funding settlement details. So as soon as we've got that, we can equate how much of the 1.3 billion and how much of Bristol's share will go to fund the increased pupil premium, which all the schools obviously will receive for those eligible pupils. In terms of the key points, the timetable is laid out in the report. Essentially, we are waiting for key information to be delivered at the end of November. It's not arrived at today. In terms of the final national funding unit values that will be used for schools' budget calculations. Then we need the dedicated schools grant allocation, so we can know how much total quantum of funding we've got to distribute to schools and academies, to high needs provisions, early years provisions, and for the central school services block. We still have the statutory deadline to meet at the 22nd of January, so we're going to be working through Christmas to decipher all of that information and interpret it to bring to you on the 15th of January for your decisions, which will have to be final decisions at that point. So any decisions today on the later reports will be in principle at this moment in time. School budgets then will be issued for maintained settings at the end of February, and academies will get the gags sometime in March from the ESFA. I've mentioned the headlines for total core schools budgets, 2.3 billion, transfer of grants I've mentioned, and there's more details on those later in the reports. Just other key highlights in terms of the high needs block. We're still waiting for all the detail. What we have found out since this report was developed is that special schools will see a 3.4% uplift in their budgets in 25-26. So that isn't in this paper, that's hot off the press from the ESFA last week. So again, that's the same mandatory increase that we had last year for special provisions. Again, we'll work through the detail once we've got the allocation for that. Central School Services block, we've not been given any indicative figures for that, other than we know we will get some additional funding to cover the national increase of copyright licences, but that's essentially retained items, so schools don't incur that cost. It's all going through the central block there. Early years block, we'll see the continued expansion of early years free entitlements, childcare, and we wait to see again what that means for Bristol in terms of the allocation. What we do know is 2-year-old participation is increasing, so we're expecting more funding to come through for 2-year-olds, which will obviously go straight to the settings for their actual participation in PBIs, maintained nursery schools and maintained nursery classes. In terms of the formula factors, so this is where what we use to interpret all of the schools and academies funding allocations. I've mentioned about the transfer of grants, but what is also included in there is between 0.4 and 1% inflation on specific unit values, apart from a couple of the deprivation and DACI factors for primary and secondary schools. Again, the DFE have not answered why they've not inflated those factors, so we'll wait to see what we get at the end of this month in the national funding formula technical documents. Pupil premium I mentioned, we won't know that until December in terms of how much extra is coming through there. I expect it to be on a similar line to the inflation elements on the school budget side of things. And then in terms of the funding settlement, we'll get that expected the 19th of December. So we'll work through the detail at that point in time. We have arranged an extra schools for the finance subgroup, so we did hold a meeting on the 14th of November to work through the headlines and the information we knew at that point in time. And just so we can work through the detail, the formula mechanics, we want to have that extra meeting. So the 15th of January meeting, you won't have the papers in advance, a full week in advance for that particular formula aspect, because the finance subgroup do need to consider that. And that was it. Again, it's, I apologise that there's got lots of unknowns in there and lots of things to do, but that's the position we're in. We would normally have indicative figures mid-July, and we've not got them today, so we're 3.5 months behind because of the delays in the government releasing that information.
So thank you, Stephen. So in a moment we'll talk in the detail about the schools block and dedelegation. But first, I guess if there's any questions for Steve on the overall paper, maybe Simon and any others who are at the finance subcommittee can say anything about that.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would say is, you know, in the summer, in July, I think, when they announced the extra funding, you know, I think that gave people a lift. I think that kind of, it felt like that was kind of, you know, putting the schools on a better footing. And now my fear is that because that's all been rolled in with all the other grants and effectively the other factors have only gone up by 0.41%, that will be eroded by pay inflation and other things, or potentially national insurance costs that's not being funded. So, you know, I thought with the new government, we'd move away from this, the government of sort of announcing new money, but actually it's not new money, and they're doing almost exactly the same thing, which is a bit depressing. But, and that national insurance thing is such an unknown, you know, in terms of what they're going to fund, but also I think they've made a statement this week or something that effectively the only bit that they are going to address with that national insurance increase is our cost as employers. Obviously, for a lot of schools that have external caterers, cleaners, where, you know, they're having a double hit of the national insurance and the increase to the minimum wage, that is not a cost that's going to be covered by that. So, yeah, it feels like one step forward, two step back in some ways. But yeah, we are where we are.
Yeah. Just on the national insurance, you all be aware of the thresholds that were changed in the autumn budget statement. The DfE have committed to provide an additional grant next financial year to cover the employers' contributions for schools on those national insurance increases. So there will be a grant next year, so it's not part of what will be enrolled into the DSG from the grants this year. So again, we don't know the details of that. We'll have to inform you in due course.
Christine?
Yeah, I suppose mine is in relation to the providers within the high needs area that aren't schools, and whether there's anything that's coming down from the DfE around NI for them, because I know that's a real concern for that particular sector. And my second question was in relation to the pupil premium. Is it all 4 of them, and have you got any indication as to whether the differentials between them will be maintained as they are?
I expect the differentials will stay the same. There'll just be an inflationary element to all, usually all 4 aspects, so the service, the deprivation, you know, the elements.
Up a little bit more.
Yeah, but we don't know the detail. In respect to the national insurance increases for providers, we're obviously there's a risk that they will try to pass those costs on to the local authority, and we don't get additional funding to help us meet those costs. What we don't know yet is the impact of the government introducing capping on what providers can charge in terms of their profit shares. So that will be a thing that commissioners will need to work through with providers. So again, there's lots of people trying to second guess how the impact on providers will then ultimately impact on the local authority in terms of costs. But again, we just don't know. People are trying to estimate the impact of that in financial terms, but we've not got a figure.
I'm more interested in the ones that aren't out for profit, because most of ours are charities or CICs and things like that. So we would, at the moment, that will just come in through our high needs budget and it will go up however much they choose to put out.
Yeah.
Okay.
My understanding is that the components that will cover teachers' pay increases and such like are averaged. So individual schools are going to get hit, possibly double hit if they've got high paid teachers.
Yeah, and that's been the same in previous in-year changes and grants where any additional grants and funding is based on an average national basis, not even a regional basis. What we did see this year with the core school budgets grant is that schools were quite happy with that in terms of the allocations that came through, because schools will be very quick to be vocal if there is insufficient funding in those grants, as there has been in previous years. So with that being sufficient this year, that's rolled forward into the DSG for next year. So there has been more confidence in the grant allocations, as I say, for this current year. But again, we just don't know the detail and the impact for next year yet.
Thank you very much for the excellent report and interesting report. Under 5.6 funding levels for the early years block, does the LA envisage providing for SENIFs, the Special Educational Needs Inclusion Funds, to be funded by the DSG at all?
It already is. The SENIF, the Early Years and Inclusion Fund, is already part of the Early Years block of the Dedicated Skills Grant. So that comes as part of that totality of funding there, which is then managed by the Early Years colleagues to support the Early Years and eligible pupils. Again, there's an issue there with volume and the number of referrals coming through at that age as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Right, well, thank you, Steve, and thank you in advance for the work that you're going to be doing over the festive season. And then I know you're going to be bringing that to the subcommittee, and then we'll be coming back in January as well. Right, oh, by the way, we just welcome Del to come in. You just want to introduce yourself to the room and where you represent?
So, Del Planter, head teacher of SMRT schools. We're at Clifton Temple, and we maintain schools secondary.
Okay, so now we'll go on to item 7, which is specifically about the schools block.
Okay, thank you. So this is getting into more of the technical detail and looking for your support with decisions in principle around some of the areas where we will definitely be looking to change the funding formula for 25-26 or continuing what we've done in previous years. Again, everything is indicative at this stage, and we'll come back for final decision in January. So you Schools Forum are asked to note the changes in any formula methodologies for 25-26 and provide feedback and any considerations to the schools block transfer, 0.5% transfer to high needs, the minimum funding guarantee at 0%, as in the previous years. Looking at the appropriate allocation to the PFI schools, and I'll come on to that in some more detail. Then looking at value of the lump sum, if there's any funding remaining after we've worked through the national funding formula, or whichever direction we go into for the funding aspects, to see where we can target that funding, as we have had that ability to do in previous years, and then to look at the growth fund. Most of the methodologies are the same as you've been used to for previous years, so I won't go through all the detail. There are some mandatory requirements that we will have to comply with, so we're not currently at the national funding formula values at every unit value within the list of schools funding factors, which are detailed in a table later. We have to move 10% closer as a mandatory item to the national funding formula values, which will be dictated by the Department of Education. We'll get those values supposedly at the end of this month, so we'll know exactly how much that will cost by moving 10% closer and how much schools will get in that change there. We've mentioned the transfer of the grants already. In terms of the minimum funding levels, the DFE have already said what the minimum funding levels are at primary key stage 1, key stage 2. they include the transfer of grants and inflation, so again, they detail on the table later on, or Appendix A. In terms of the funding formula, so we're looking at maintaining the minimum funding guarantee at 0% in the previous years. The DFE announced last week that we could look to reduce the minimum funding guarantee to -0.5%, which would then mean schools could see reductions in funding of up to 0.5% per pupil. So we won't be putting that forward. We want to maintain as much money into school budgets and protections as possible. Again, we've got to go through looking at what scope we've got for growth funding. So there's a table later on in terms of the current growth. What we will need to do is retain an element of funding from the dedicated schools grant. We do get an allocation for growth, so it isn't essentially taken away from schools. It's an additional element that we get in the dedicated schools grant, which is part of the allocation we'll get on the 19th of December. Need to agree again the continued support for the high needs block by transferring 0.5% of the schools block into that area. And then looking at the grants, so I'm on to item 6 on page 24 of your pack. So detailed there was some confusion around how much has been transferred into the unit values for the transfer of grants. So we've broken it down in the table to show you exactly how much is going to be added to the pupil funding to key stage primary, key stage 3 and key stage 4, the free school meals factors and the lump sum. One of the areas in terms of the core schools budget grant didn't add up to the DFE's calculations of the full year equivalent. So full year equivalent, just for example, on primary basic pupil, comes to £55, not £51. So we've managed to detail this to the finance subgroup. It's because there's an element in that core school budget grant that relates to support staff. It's not all for teachers. The support staff element gets technical. The support staff element is in there for the full year, but teachers is only in there for 7/12, and it's only that teacher's bit that gets equated up. So if you do go through the detail and try to work out full year effects of some of the figures on there, they don't add up because the DFE don't declare the detail behind the scenes. But we can provide that at the next meeting in terms of the full breakdown for that. But essentially all of that is transferring into the school's funding formula. In terms of the proposals, I've mentioned already, we'd like your support in respect to the 0.5% transfer to high needs. So that's covered in item 7. The minimum funding guarantee to continue at 0% as in previous years. We will need to come back to agree the level of the growth fund, but seek your agreement in principle to retain an element of growth to fund those schools that are seeing increased pupil numbers, increased class sizes, and basic need requirements for those. Everything else we'll look to see what we can do once we've got the funding settlement. So if we can maximise the lump sum, again maximise the additional education needs factors. This was all subject to the funding consultation that we held with schools. The majority of schools that responded would still like us to support the additional education needs factors, and that's been an element of support in Bristol schools for quite some time now, which is why we're not at the national funding formula, because we fund greater amounts for the schools in the most deprived areas or with the lowest attainment to help those schools with those specific needs. So again, it makes sense that those schools would vote to continue to support that particular area. We've asked in the consultation around if there's any preference, if we do have any funding available, whether that would people would prefer that to go to the primary sector or to the secondary sector, and the responses were to maintain it as an equal amount, so all schools benefit fairly from any funding that we might have left once we've complied with the formula factors. Mention growth. Sorry, so it's quite a long report, so I'm going to make it easier. Even for myself, I'll make it easy. So we again 7.24. We've cleared this at the last schools board meeting, so we're not intending to propose any formal rules fund. I think we had that minute in and everybody was in approval at the last meeting. So in terms of your decisions, and this is for mainstream schools and academies, we're asking for your support, as I've mentioned now a couple of times, in terms of noting the changes that have to be made to the formula by the ESFA, so that's the mandatory 10% closer to the national funding formula, minimum funding guarantee at 0%, transfer of 0.5% to the schools block, transition closer to the national funding values if we can, so we'll have to move 10% closer, but if we can, we're trying to move even closer, because at some stage it will be mandated that we have to move a lot nearer than 10% to those unit values. I've mentioned in a previous paper that we're only one, or in the consultation paper, we're one of a minority of local authorities now who aren't funding at the national funding formula values. We're probably one of 13 out of 150 authorities that aren't quite there. So we can move closer, then that's a consideration for you and through the finance subgroup. Maintain the lump sum if possible, and distribute any additional funding to the AEN factors. If there's any balance of funding, allocate through the basic per pupil amount, so all schools benefit on the per pupil funding. Maintain no bias between primary and secondary, so everything's done fairly, so we're not weighting anything more to one sector than the other. Get mentioned national and domestic rates, that's an in and out, that's a national scheme now, so whatever the national and domestic rates are, it gets top slice and is funded essentially through that arrangement. And no re-establishment to the following roles fund. All of those proposals were subject to the consultation with schools, so item 8 goes through the consultation responses that we had to that. So the consultation was launched on the 10th of October through to the 6th of November. We held a briefing with schools on the 22nd of October, which was attended by roughly 50 schools, thereabouts. And you can see we had 22 responses to the consultation. So as far as the consultation goes, it was transparent, it was fair, there was sufficient time, we held the briefing, there was opportunity through Schools Forum, we distributed it separately through Schools Forum. So we would support the responses of that consultation, which is why we've said in the paper that we recommend you support the responses of the schools that did respond. I've said on page 30 what the unit values are in terms of current financial year 24-25, the increases for next year. So you can see there's an 8% or more increase for some factors. That's because of the grant transfers. So we've broken down the increases to show what was the additional amount, what was the core school budget amount, and what the inflation element is. So you can see there where there's only 0.4% or 1% inflation on top of the grant transfers. So all those factors and values are still indicative until we get the detail at the end of this month. The pupil funding levels are included, as I've said previously, that's the protection, so no school will be funded less than that per pupil. I've mentioned on page 31 around the growth fund, so we've got current growth allocations there. They will continue into the full year effects for next year. So we do need to look at the total growth fund that we can utilise there. There has been some additional in-year growth as well, which we need to update for the next report. And we've included on page 32 some of the comments for transparency in terms of the consultation responses from schools. I think it's fair to share with you what the schools were saying to the consultation questions. So they're there just purely for information. Okay, so what we're asking for then in this report is your decisions in principle behind the formula consultation. And I've mentioned basically on page 27 going into page 28 where we'd like your support with moving towards allowing us to do the work between Christmas and New Year to work through all these formula components.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Lots of detail there, so thank you. In principle, are the recommendations in line with the majority views from the consultation?
Yes, that is. Yeah.
Okay, so let's have any questions, clarifications, comments, and then we can talk about detailed voting. Randy?
Hi. With regard to the additional needs elements of the formula, are they now in excess of the national funding formula? In which case, are we actually making schools rely on funding they're not going to get in future, and therefore actually making a rod for their back?
Potentially, I mean that's a consequence of decisions that have been made for many years. So to answer the question, yes, we do fund above the current national funding formula values for the additional education needs factors. If we move to the national funding formula values, those schools that benefit from that would see less funding coming through those factors. That would then be redistributed through the other factors where we'd be below the national funding formula values for basic entitlement, for the other elements, the lump sum, for example. So what would also kick in is that the minimum funding guarantee would apply to schools, so they wouldn't see any reduction in funding from the previous year per pupil. So the schools are protected, and it's a transition, so it wouldn't, to me, it wouldn't be done all in 1 year. It's how quickly we move to that stage. But the protections are in the system through the minimum per pupil funding levels and the minimum funding guarantee. So there's double protections in there for schools that might be adversely impacted by that change.
So with regard to the 10% move towards the national funding formula figures, are we talking about reducing the AEN by 10% to get them closer? Or are we because on one hand we're talking about 10%, getting 10% closer to national funding formula figures, and on the other hand we're talking about any additional funding that's maybe available being put back into the AEN. So it doesn't seem to make sense.
No, we have got the mandated. I understand exactly what you're saying. So it's that balancing act in terms of what we can do within the restrictions of the national funding formula requirements. So we do have to move 10% closer, but by moving 10% closer to the AEN factors, i.e. a 10% reduction on the variance, which is only on the variance, then that 10% would be added to the pupil funding. So it would go through that factor rather than the other one. So you'd have to then look at the bottom line on the school to see how
I
it's
used to run the formula right now.
So it's just that balancing act, and then we'd look at what would it mean if we moved 50% closer to the national funding formula values, and what would it mean if we moved straight to it in one go 100%. So work through all of those scenarios with the final subgroup. And my principle is always the least adverse impact on any school, on the total number of schools, to go for the best model that fits. So that's what we'll do, and within the quantum of funding that we've got, and make sure we comply with the national funding formula value, because we can't. There's another requirement that the values can be 2.5% either way of the national funding formula value, so we have to bear that in mind as well.
And where are we with the AEN? Are we 2.5% above, or are we
about
more?
10% above at the moment? So it's just that we would just look to transition it nearer, which is what the requirement is. But those authorities that are classed as mirroring the national funding formula have to then maintain it within a 2.5% threshold either way.
Christine?
Thank you. So you mentioned that, because the paper says that the MFG can go from 0 to +5, nothing to 0.5. But you spoke about -5.
-0.5, sorry.
So can you just expand on that and why it wasn't part of the consultation? That's my first point. And then my second point is in relation to the AEN, the move towards supporting the AEN is in recognition of the needs that schools have within their cohorts. And we know that the minimum funding guarantee if the national funding formula ever comes into fruition, because we've been waiting for it for about 7 or 8 years now, the minimum funding guarantee will then enable those schools whose cohorts have much higher needs than others to have to continue to have those funds, and that's the point of it.
I'm aware of the point, because as I say, I've run the formula for Bath and North East Somerset in the past, so I'm very well aware of how it all works. And I'm aware that obviously some schools have got very high deprivation needs, but what I'm saying is, aren't we actually giving them funding that they're not going to have long term, and therefore they're going to rely on those funds and then have to reduce in time anyway. So to put more in just seems like...
But their MFG goes up. Their MFG will guarantee...
I understand what you're saying. The MFG will actually mean that they won't lose money per pupil. But what I'm saying is, if we put more money into that, over time, it will reduce their funding. Because obviously, once the funding goes to the national funding formula, and as Steve has said, it will be mandated at some stage. It could be next year, it could be 3 or 4 years down the line.
There we go. Yeah.
At the end of the day, if we keep putting money into the AEN, which is already above the current national funding formula figures, aren't we making a rod for those schools' backs, whereby they then will have a reduced funding at some point?
And the point I'm making is, those children are in those schools now, and those schools need those schools with cohorts with high numbers of children with AEN need that funding, and those children need that funding in order to get the education now today. The national funding formula may come in at some point. Have you got any indication from the DFE as to a date?
The original indication was next year, was when the hard national funding formula was going to come in, but obviously that's not the case now. Maybe 2028-29 is the next indication, but there's so many issues to work through by then. In terms of the MFG, if any school is protected on the MFG, then that's protected in future years as well, because it forms part of the baseline. So then it continues, so it'll be in the system for quite a few years until it works out. And on the -0.5%, we were invited to an ESFA briefing last week, the Education and Skills Funding Agency. It was in a PowerPoint, so we hadn't seen it in the detail, therefore it wasn't in the consultation. So we picked up on it in that briefing, which obviously was not the best way to hear about it. It's just unfortunately due to the volume of information that's been provided and the lack of detail that we didn't pick up on that. It was in a PowerPoint presentation.
So it's the first time you saw it was last week?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
But was it when this document came through?
We didn't see it in the document.
Is it in the document?
To be honest, I'll double check. I haven't gone back and checked.
Okay.
The first time we saw it was in that PowerPoint last week.
Right.
So, but I'll double check. But regardless, subject to schools forum decision, we wouldn't be supporting that as a way forward anyway, to go to 0.5% reduction for people.
Okay, thank you.
I've been part of the schools forum for quite a long time, and any time that we've had discussions about the AEN, that particular factor, we've always erred on the side of putting the money where inclusion is needed, so supporting pupils with SEN and EAR and so on. And I think if we as a forum morally want to go slowly on something that we disagree with morally, then I would support that. I think why rush to do something that in effect is wrong? Inclusion needs to be funded, and we need to support schools that are inclusive. And I know that everybody's budgets are tight at the moment, but we have a rising issue with difficulties and schools trying to support pupils with SEN and keeping them in mainstream education, which in effect is cheaper than special. So I'd be definitely supporting.
I think you've got the wrong end of the stick in regard to what I'm trying to say. All I'm trying to do is make people aware. I'm not suggesting that the AEN is reduced. What I'm saying is, are you aware that it's already above the national funding formula, and that in future this is going to be a problem for those schools.
Well, yeah, but at the moment we can say no and we
Yes,
can...
absolutely, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, be aware.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not suggesting at all that AEN is not the right way to go. I just wanted to make sure that I'm playing devil's advocate here
Yeah.
and making people aware of what the situation is long term. If, as Steve says, national funding formula could come in next year, and those schools will be having problems.
Okay, thank you. That's some good points there. Simon?
Just a couple of things on that. I guess, I mean, there is the assumption that when the national funding formula comes in, MFG will apply in the same way. So to Christine's point, that's correct. Actually, those schools won't have an instant hit. It will kind of
over time.
Yeah. But actually setting the MFG at 0%, in fact, in real terms, the schools do have a cut, because if the figures were inflated, if there's no other grants, ignoring all the rolled in things that smoke and mirrors, if the normal factors are inflated by 2% or 3%, then with MFG, you're actually losing that. So, you know, that's the sort of bit that you would be losing over time, those schools. So, but they would be, you know, I say, it would be a pretty outrageous thing if they didn't apply MFG when NFF comes in.
And sorry, another question I was going to bring up was, I noticed that there's a primary school on here with growth fund. I was just wondering whether from the other end they were losing pupils. So we've got an extra class at one end and less at the other, and whether they should then, I mean, it may be that they are still growing year on year, but
I actually don't know the school, I don't know the detail, so but that's something we could come back on.
If we can take that away and come back on it.
I mean, the same could be said for secondaries, but
yeah.
I'm just pointing out one end and the other.
I think that was one that was asked to expand. That's very cool, isn't it?
Sorry, Simon? Yeah.
Very cool, yeah. I think that was one that was asked to expand. So, but I don't know what's actually happening to their numbers.
Yes, exactly.
But I think I've always been of the belief if someone agrees to expand, they should be supported by the growth fund whilst those students flow throughout the whole system.
I'm just wondering whether they are still expanding.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so you don't have the answer to that there, but it's noted, so thank you for that. Nope, sorry. Right, oh, so yeah.
I think it's just an observation rather than a kind of an answer. We've been asked to vote on something which morally we look at the city perspective, and you know, these are students, young people across the city. Your conscience says vote in one way and support in that way. When you look at your school, the impact is different from a variety of different schools. So think about the notional funding. For my school, it's £1,016,000, if I've done the calculations correctly. If I lifted the school to a different local authority, it would be 548,000 or 598,000. And so I think it's just there's a real tension in saying, okay, what's the best thing to vote for the city and people across the city, and maybe challenges that you're facing within your own setting. And so I think what I'm hearing around the room, that everyone is on the same page about doing the absolute best for young people in our city. Just don't think the answers are that straightforward. Comment rather than I don't expect a response.
Okay, I'm now going to move us along. So we do need to explicitly make a decision. As I understand it, it's an in-principle decision that can be revisited in January, but it's to help with all the planning of getting all the budgets in place. There has been consultation, but the school forum doesn't have to follow. There's the consultation can take its own view. I think this decision is all members of the forum, mainstream schools and academies. So and I think we just need to go through what's in 7.29.
Yes.
Okay. So the first one is to note the changes made by the formula by the ESFA. So I think we can note that, yeah. Okay. The second one, that the MFG be set at 0%. So let's start off with just a simple show of hands of people in support of that. Right, in which case we might need to be counting and working out who can vote. Okay then. So put your hand right up. Ten. Okay, and 11. And not in favour of that. Okay. Okay, the next one is the 0.5% transfer to the school block to high needs. Again, hands in the air if you're supporting of that.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay, and not.
Need an abstain.
Okay, sorry, better rerun. Okay,
Just
right.
recheck, please.
The high needs block.
Oh, we might only want to. Yeah, it's you. No,
Okay, very good. Transition closer to the NFF values. Is there a decision there, or was that just noting it?
But there's a mandatory element, so we have to move 10% closer, which you can't really vote on. But the other bit is to look to transition even closer if possible.
So what's the explicit ask?
I think we probably need to defer that one until the final subgroup proceeding scenarios and then get back in January.
Would you like it noted?
There's no.
Yeah.
Okay, the E, which is the sort of intention that you're going to go into the algorithms with, maintain the lump sum at the current value and any remaining funding after meeting mandated requirements to be distributed to the AEN factors up to the maximum allowed, which, and is that the approach which has been followed previously?
It has been, yes, and the maximum allowed would be the restrictions within the national funding formula, value maximums within the thresholds that I've mentioned, about 10% closer, and all the other percentages we have to comply with.
So does that mean, does that mean to say that if there's a mandatory requirement of the 2.5%, is that a mandatory requirement, 2.5%?
The mandatory element is to be
Either way?
10% closer, so the AEN would have to be seen to be reducing by 10%.
Yeah.
But if there's any funding left, it's what scope we've got to, target any sort of funding.
Just trying to get the...
Yeah, it's hard to explain. We have to work through, obviously, the algorithms or the formulas, but we just need to look at what we can possibly do within the AEN factors to look to maintain that if possible.
Yeah, no, I was
within
just
the maximums.
remembering that you were saying that there's a 2.5%.
That's if you're already mirroring the national funding formula
Across the board.
Across the board. So you have that 2.5% either way threshold. So this will, be maintained within the 10% as maximum as we can in there, given the quantum of funding and everything else. It's hard without the figures. I wish I could have a spreadsheet presented.
Okay.
Okay, so, right, what it says at E. Yeah, explicit, voted for supportive of that.
5, 6, 7.
Get me?
8. Sorry, I keep forgetting. I don't know how to do
Okay,
that.
and not.
So, anyone else abstaining? 2 abstaining? 3 abstaining?
Thank you.
Yeah, that has that.
Well, if anybody's not clear about things, I guess there's an option of either pinging Steve directly. We will come back to this in January, and the subcommittee will also meet and then basically report whether they're in agreement as well.
Chair, what we'll do between now and the January forum, when we meet with the final subgroup, is we'll demonstrate this at individual school level, so you can see the impacts of any haven't had the chance to do that for this meeting.
Okay, the next one, again, it's a rule, so if there is any balance of funding after B, then allocate that to AWPU. Okay? All those who are happy with that?
1, 2. Oh, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, we've got it. Yeah. You know the voting in schools.
Right, next one. No bias of this distribution to either primary or secondary. Can you put that into English again, please?
That was just to make sure that there was no decisions made that would target funding more heavily weighted to one sector rather than the other, to maintain the current proportionate split.
Does that mean just United?
No, well, we can vote on that. We're on a roll. Yeah.
All right, great.
Okay, so we're happy with that. Vote again, please.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we're good.
And not?
I'll vote against.
Yeah.
Okay. That the premises factors are appropriately funded consistent with previous years. So again, a sentence, Steve?
Again, there's very little choice in the NMDR because they are the rates, national non-domestic rates billed for schools will be determined in line with the price increases for that area. Whatever that is will have to be funded through the funding formula, and then it's top sliced as part of the national arrangement. The PFI, we need to look at to make sure that's appropriately funded in line with RPIX, the retail price index. So again, it's maintaining, just making sure we're in approval to maintain those factors in line with the inflation and the RPIX.
My understanding is that we haven't got a lot of choice in that, have we?
No, very little. Well, no.
So we just note it. So it's not a vote, it's just to note it.
It's just a note.
Okay, we'll note that. Right. Okay, nearly there. The growth fund, 2 million to be allocated to the growth fund. And just explain why it's 2 million.
The 2 million was based on the allocation we've got in the dedicated schools grant. And that figure, as I've mentioned from the outset, is subject to change based on when we get the funding sacrament. So it's basically to agree in principle that the fund will be retained at the level of the dedicated schools grant allocation. That's it. The 2 million was the current year figure. We don't know what that is for next year.
Okay, so in principle, to maintain that level.
Can I just ask a question on that then? I mean, it is determined by the number of schools that are included in that, presumably?
It's based on a per pupil calculation, so the DFE do their estimates of population growth and look at the area and previous censuses and predict that forward. So it's more on a per pupil basis. It ultimately gets allocated to individual settings, but the allocation we receive is on a per pupil population calculation.
Was that included in the consultation?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so those supportive of that, again, voting? Okay. Abstentions? If we've got 11, we've got 11.
Yeah.
Okay, final one, not to re-establish the falling roles.
This is just reiterating the recommendation from the previous schools forum meeting, just to make sure we're covering our bases.
Okay, so, yeah, voting on that one.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, right. Thank you very much, everybody. That probably is about the most detailed set of paperwork we will look at all year. And we'll look at it again in the next meeting.
With more figures.
Okay, right. We've got our final item now, and this is to do with the de-delegation. So, Steve, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you. So, on an annual basis, schools forum need to make a recommendation in respect to the de-delegation. This is affecting maintained schools only. So effectively, it's the contribution to central support services as outlined in section 2.2. So we're looking for maintained primary schools to make a recommendation and separately maintained secondary schools to make their recommendation. This was all included in the recent consultation with schools, and the results were detailed in this paper to show that of the schools that responded, they were in various degrees in favour of all the delegated proposals. So the recommendation from the local authority would be to support the responses from schools as part of that consultation. So the areas affected are preschool meals eligibility checking, which does benefit schools ultimately in making sure we maximise the numbers of eligible pupils paying the pupil premium. The maternity supply insurance, again, is that cover for the, when staff are off due to maternities, that reimbursement to the schools. Trade union facilities time, you recall from last year we had a fund in reserve, which is fund where we agreed not to de-delegate for 1 year only, for 2024-25, to utilise the reserve that had accumulated over a number of years. Well, that reserve has been fully utilised in 2024-25, which is what we said at the schools forum when this was decided last January. So that has to be reconsidered to get the contributions to the trade union facilities time from maintained schools, but also to reinstigate the invoices to academies and make sure we've got all the administrative arrangements in place to get those agreements, raise the invoices, and academies pay the invoices, because there have been some issues in previous years where we've had to do lots of credit notes and lots of alternative arrangements, if you like. We've got a small de-delegation for health and safety roving reps, that's for the secondary schools only, and then the education psychology and school improvement services. So as I say, the full details, lots of detail around the unit values, the pupil amounts, the inflationary elements were included in the consultation. The results of the consultation are on page 37. With the majority of schools voting to de-delegate for all of those factors.
Okay, so can I have a general discussion that anybody wants to raise any clarification or any points understanding it, and then the vote itself is just going to be for maintaining sector reps. So open to questions. Really?
Clarification if I can. Table 4, which was the primary de-delegation consultation, so 9 votes. If we had the same conversation last year, it's not a great response. I think it was 11 last year, so we've gone the other way. I haven't got any solutions for that, I'm afraid. If anyone has, great. But just from my understanding on the all of votes, so just taking the top line, employee and premises insurance, 9 votes, none of which voted to delegate. Am I reading that right? So the what was the day?
It's to de-delegate.
So to delegate would be to just not have anything top sliced or de-delegated from schools. So the schools keep the money. They would have to enter into their own insurance arrangements and pay directly from the school budgets. So with that one, 100% of schools voted to retain the central arrangement. So where the local authority enters into the equivalent of the risk protection arrangements that academies have. So again, 100% in favour of continuing that arrangement there.
Thank you. So of the 9 voted to de-delegate, and there was no votes to delegate. Yeah, thank you.
I mean, just on your first point, Lee, I think if I've got it right, the response rate is not wonderful or good, and it's in line with historical levels. Open to any observations or suggestions about.
Yeah, I think we obviously undertook the consultation. There was a short period of time to deal with that because of the timing frame of the DFE, as we've said, with the delays. But what we would expect, and we held the additional briefing, which I'd say attracted around 50 schools, so would have liked to think those 50 would have responded to it. But I think there's probably more we can do as an authority and as a schools forum in terms of communicating with our representative groups, governor briefings, head teacher briefings. As, once we go through that consultation again, and potentially reminders, we don't like to keep chasing schools up, you've not responded to this, you've not responded to that, but there's potentially more we can do. Obviously for next year, this is the results we've had for this year.
Okay, Vic, then
I might slightly disagree with Steve on some of that. I think we did communicate this as far and wide as we could. We also held a briefing which we invited all maintained schools to, which myself and Sue Coombs and other colleagues chaired, where they took colleagues through a presentation on each of the items, I think particularly school improvement and educational psychology, where there was more detail from our specific services around this. So it's difficult to kind of, we can't push schools to vote. That there sometimes is a silent majority, but I think we entered into the process with as much briefing and information, responded to queries so that schools can make an informed decision, and the turnout, but I don't think that means we can't make a decision today in terms of how these services will be funded and supported going forward.
Yeah, I wonder if it's something that the forum can encourage its members to actually have ways of contacting people. As a governor of maintaining primary schools, how can I contact other governors that I'm supposed to represent? So I think some sort of help to have some sort of list or something that we can actually enter in contact with the constituency that we're supposed to represent, I think would be very helpful.
Yes. Shall we make a note? Okay. Any other comments? Mary?
Just asking, having not seen the information about employee and premises insurance, is it comprehensive? I'm dealing with 2 situations in other local authorities where they bought into the LA insurance offer, and it doesn't offer legal support for industrial tribunals, and those 2 schools are now having to find the money to do that themselves. What level of information were the schools provided on the content of the insurance that they're buying into?
Can anybody answer that today?
Does it match up?
It should align to the risk protection arrangements, which academies
buy into, which is massively comprehensive. From past experience, that legal particular aspect that you mentioned was an additional extra, so schools needed to take out separate insurance for that. And there was other elements that were missing as well for mechanical and engineering if the school had a lift, for example. But I thought those had been enhanced within the policy over the last few years by the DFE, for the RPA. But that legal aspect, I'll have to look into and come back to you on that. I wasn't aware that was still a gap.
The RPA does not offer cover for minibuses either.
No, that's another one. Yeah.
No, but the LA does, so this covers more than just the RPA. It's not just the RPA by another name. There are other policies associated with this as well. This is the, okay, we don't have an insurance officer in the room, so I'm not going to put words in their mouth or want to be quoted on it. But it is the same offer as in previous years. It is comprehensive. The LA wouldn't be putting its schools or its employees at risk in these areas. So in addition to the to the offers available, which is part of the package, it does all the claims handling, it does the self-insurance as well, and creates the what the word is I'm looking for, the little bit of money which you pay, the excess on it as well.
Okay, thank you. So, Mary, does that answer, or what would you like a response as well? Yeah, okay, we'll,
as long as it matches RPA.
okay, but maybe we can just note and come back on that. Right, now we're going to move to, we're going to move to vote on the delegation and start off with primary, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 items, and I need you to help me. So, and everybody who thinks they're eligible to vote, stick your hands up.
One, that's primary.
I think three of us.
Meeting.
Lee, Martin, Melanie. Yes.
Right.
1, 2, where's Melanie? Oh, there you are. Right, I've got you.
I know I tried to do this quickly last year and then I failed. So right, okay. Employee and premises insurance in favour.
Okay, we're good.
FSM eligibility.
Bristol meals.
Okay.
Maternity supply insurance.
Yeah.
Schools in financial. No, that's not there. No, okay, right. Trade union facility time.
Okay, that's what, any abstaining?
Against.
I'm abstaining.
One abstaining.
I think this is one where we're not sure. Oh, I mean, Merch and I are both on the finance subcommittee, so we obviously have discussed this a little bit as well. And I know it was a big question for schools from last year. I think we're under the impression that the money from last year has been fully used up.
Yeah.
So, can we bring this to the next? Can we come back to a vote at the next committee?
We
or
can do.
we
I
need
think
to
the
vote now?
unions might want some
Okay.
assurance in terms of the arrangements going forward. If we don't de-delegate, then we do need to enter into that negotiation with the schools and academies.
Yeah.
Vic?
Yeah, I think if it's helpful, I suppose if you've got questions, I met with the unions this week and last week on, and they did raise this. If there are questions about what the facility time is, I can try and fill some of those in their absence at this meeting. So if you have questions about that, I mean, I suppose that funding is used to release teacher time to support various activities, I suppose, in terms of representing their members. So the de-delegation funds that, and then academies contribute to that pot in a different way to maintain schools where they'll have their own agreements. So last year there was a reserve, and I think that's why there was no de-delegation last year to fund that part. I think that reserve is now depleted, which is why it's come back on the table. So I don't know if that helps clarify that position.
Okay, so Christine and then sorry. Oh, sorry, Debbie.
Sorry, I didn't think I was going to answer.
Sorry, okay. You joined us later, so introduce yourself and then
David,
you've probably got something to say.
National Education Union, yeah. I thought we were only voting today on whether it was still pulled, but then I thought we were voting again in January whether we contributed to the pot. Is that right? Did I get that wrong? Because I thought today was just for the...
It's decisions in principle about, I mean, it'll be the same.
Whether the pooling stays in place, but then I thought January was when we normally talk about whether you contribute the funds into the pot. Is that right? Have I got that wrong? But you're doing that today.
It's all one in the same.
Sort of say, okay, I got that wrong. Sorry, I thought this was just a report on whether the pooling still stayed, but
no,
we weren't actually
included in cost today was about redoing the academy invoices as well, and about establishing the arrangement.
Okay, so this is come early.
We did make it clear last year in January it was a 1 year only decision.
Yeah, no, it's normally, but we normally vote in January, isn't it?
Well, no, we do vote in
do
November where we can, but final decisions
are
made in January.
Okay, fine. I mean,
David, since you're here,
I'll
can you just say
facilities? Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't have my head on talking. Facilities is to release us as officers to come and support your staff. So obviously, if you don't pay in as maintain schools, we won't be available to support your staff. It's simple as that. So when you have disciplinary capability issues, you have to have a union rep. They have to have the right to have a union rep with them by law. So you can't not have a union rep. You're then in a very difficult position. If you haven't paid into the funds, you're not paying for us to come and support them. So you're stuck in a position where it gets very complicated. We would have to invoice you separately. It actually would end up more expensive, I think, you'd find for your school than just paying a small amount into the pool. Though I can see it seems like a big sum. If you've got a lot of staff in your school, I can't remember the exact. It can seem like a big sum, but when you actually divide it by the amount of staff you have in your school to be covered by, it's like £30 a head or something, £20 a head. I know it looks as a lump sum, but for what you get in return, it's actually not a huge sum of money. And you can't really take people through any of those processes without a union rep at their side. You can't take someone through a disciplinary, an investigative, and that kind of process. You wouldn't be allowed to do that. So you are a bit stuck. And what we have is that we can't send in an officer to support your staff. So then you have to work out how you're going to do that, because there's not much of a solution to that really, apart from us having to charge you. So what some of the academy chains do, we have separate agreements with academy chains, so CLF for example, but they still have to pay. They actually end up, the thing is, it doesn't actually save you any money, so you'd have to make your own plans to pay for us, which would end up more expensive. So one of the academy chains, that CLF, pays for an officer to be released within their academy chain 2 days a week. Actually, if you look at the maths behind that, they're probably paying more than if they just pay. I mean, it's up to them, but if they're just paid and pulled into this, where they get all the officers across all the unions free to come and work for them. Sorry, I
okay, so
I can testify that is the case.
So I mean, it's up to you, but it does put you in a difficult position.
The only thing to clarify is that we are actually pulling per pupil. It's not a per staff member.
No, of course, that's how they calculate. No, I understand that, but what I'm saying is that the idea of the money is to cover your staff, so your staff are all covered by the unions. Your staff won't be staff, when we tell them, oh, sorry, your school doesn't pay into our union, then it causes issues. They ring us up and I'm like, well, I can't really support you at the moment. We'll talk about how I'm going to support you. I'll have to call X to the head office and try and sort someone out from there. So you are, if you don't contribute to it, you are depriving all your staff from union representation. From not just any year.
You can invoice them, so it's not necessary.
Yeah, you can, but it does, it will work out more expensive for you.
Yeah.
Okay, now Merchant Lee, what would you like to do, please?
I think we're feeling under extreme pressure.
Yeah,
it's your vote, and we vote for, we vote against. We could probably defer to January, depending on further information.
Just one last point as well. The money doesn't go, just to make clear, it doesn't obviously go to the union. The union doesn't see any of that money. It does just sit in the council, and it goes back to teachers and support staff within schools. So it pays teachers, it doesn't pay
It
unions.
pays the school.
It pays the schools to release us, so I'm still paid by my school. So it's not money that doesn't go back into education budgets within, you know, it's not something that the kind of union has taken off and using the money, but the subs that go to the union each month by teachers and support staff doesn't cover the officers' roles, it just covers staff within the union, which seems, I know, an odd system, but it's just the way that unions
I think
it's the only way we can work
you
it.
know, I mean, we do understand
Yeah.
what it is and what it's for. I think it would be good to be able to really put a figure on it, because obviously if we're saying the fund's completely used up, we're saying there's an 11% increase this year in the per pupil charge. I think that's what it is, yeah. 11% increase from the previous financial year, what was proposed in the previous financial year, because we didn't contribute to it last year. So can we bring this back in?
Yeah, and bring it to finance group if it is.
So we're going to...
Can I just ask a subsequent question? If we chose not to do that, who would the invoicing would come directly from the union, or would it come from the council?
Well, that's something we'll have to arrange, because at the moment the local authority raises the invoices on behalf of the unions, and then we enter into all the debt recovery. Every time an academy doesn't pay, we have to do credit notes, etc. So it is an administrative burden, but I'm not sure the academies wouldn't have the mechanisms, the union wouldn't have the mechanism to raise invoices directly, I'm sure, but it's something that we'd have to consider.
It might be that a school that releases them has to invoice them.
Yes. Yeah.
No, the union doesn't pay out, it doesn't come from the union. They
I
don't
didn't
pay
say
the
that.
officers.
I didn't say that. I said the school that releases them would raise the invoice against the school that it's possible.
Yeah.
Okay, so are we clear what information will be required in order to make a definitive decision in January?
Can we get, is there any way as well we can have more, how would we be, because we've always had this issue of having a really small amount of people voting for the delegation, whereas
there's been a consultation to all schools, we've heard about that, and based on the consultation there were 6 for and 3 against. However, it's ultimately forum members, that's what we're to decide on that.
But we had Chris, obviously sadly he's not with us anymore, but Chris used to vote, so we had 4, which was always a small amount. But are we missing, we're missing members of the forum? If we increase the numbers on the forum, would we have more people to vote for the delegation? Is it, the numbers have always been so small.
It is a small group.
Yeah.
I think if it is a larger group, it wouldn't be huge. I'm very much led by the response to the consultation in my decision, and I think there's some challenges around the scale of that which we spoke about already. I think my issue is it's not clear with such a small pool, and clearly there were sort of some conflicting responses to the items we're starting to go through now.
Yeah.
So I think from my perspective, I need a little bit more information about that and a little bit more time to think about what we're doing. So I think where, the first 3 items we've gone through is a very clear yes from all of us. I want to abstain for the remainder when asked to vote. And I'll like to revisit that in January with a little bit more information about pounds and pence.
Okay.
And see
So
what we can do in the
can just
meantime.
be absolutely clear, please? What is the information that you would, further information you would like? I think it's about the service or numbers or...
I think not so much the service, but I think the specific figures, these are indicative at the moment. I think I'd like to see some more precise figures once they go through the finance subgroup and then come back in January. I think that'd be really helpful. And then I'll probably like a chat with Mel and Mersh about what we can do to make sure we are making the right decision, having had such a poor response to the consultation, and see if we can do anything between now and January to come back in an informed position in January to make a decision on that day.
Okay.
Would it be better?
Melon, sorry, Melon Merch,
Oh,
are you in line with Lee on that?
Yeah, I mean, as the three of us, it doesn't really feel like we can vote if Lee's abstaining.
Okay.
Can I,
Vic?
can I I can hear most of what's happening in there. I think there's a couple of points here. One is there's a consultation that's taken place which is opened and then closed, so the information won't change between now and January. If there's clarification that wasn't put out during the consultation, then I'm sure that can be presented, but there's a risk here that we are extending the consultation without that having been the purpose of that exercise, and a position, and I just wanted to correct Steve, something you said, which was 7 schools voted for this, 3 voted against, which would be 70% out of that. So, you know, whilst I understand colleagues might want some clarification and additional information, it's not clear to me from this discussion what information you're lacking in order to be able to make a decision that's representative of the consultation.
So, what I heard was request for the specific amounts that's involved.
That's correct,
and also some time to be able to have an internal discussion for you to come back in January.
Yeah, exactly. And just to be clear, not looking to reopen the consultation. We appreciate that's happened. It's closed, and very much looking to support with next year's consultation, so we're getting more than 9 responses back. Last year we were only just able to make a decision on 11. It's gone down to 9 now. So we just need a little bit more time to make sure we're doing the right thing for our group.
Okay, right. Just to be formal about this, I'm going to ask for a vote on education psychology now.
Sorry, we need to trade union, don't we?
Sorry?
We didn't get a full one on trade union, we had one last.
No, we've deferred it.
Right, we've deferred.
I think we're talking about the last 3 items.
Yeah.
No, I know.
Steve wants to go through the test.
Okay. So, I want to know if we have a vote. So, education psychology, voting to defer.
Yeah, voting to defer.
Okay, right. School improvement service. Voting to defer? Okay, now, so what is the additional information that you require on educational psychology, and what is the additional information you require on school improvement service?
Specific figures, please.
Yeah, I mean, presumably there is a budget line for that and how it's being used and things like that. So, and then we've got these numbers which are 4.9, things like just how 460, how that sort of has been arrived at. I think that would be helpful.
Okay, right, now then.
We got this.
Sorry.
I think, Steve, I think we need to go back to the consultation document, which I'm not sure is shared in, I mean, the report's a summary of it, but a lot of that information was provided in the bigger consultation document that was shared by Steve and colleagues when that went out in terms of the budget. So that wouldn't be new information. That's information that's already been provided and which a number of schools will have considered as part of their decision making in response to the consultation. So, as I said, deferral wasn't an option. We can consider a deferral, I suppose, but the aim of the discussion today was to make a decision on those representative of that consultation. So I'm not clear on quite where we're heading in this conversation in terms of deferring things to January.
So effectively, I think what we've got is 3 people abstaining, so there is no decision. So it will need to be revisited in January when the time. Hang on.
So I suppose we just need to consider the implications, because what we're saying is that the service will be funded by the schools. If the services are funded by the schools, there's a pressure on the local authority, and so there's an implication, I think, from this which we need to consider for the service and also our budget position, which is why we wanted to bring it today to know one way or the other in order to plan for the service. I mean, and obviously we've got a budget position coming up in January, February. We can look at whether if there were a decision in January that still works, but basically there's a risk that you end up with either moving out of service or we have an unfunded pressure from into both school improvement and education psychology. So I suppose I just need to, I think that's the position that we're not making decisions.
I agree, yeah, exactly. On both of those services, I think, well, educational psychology and school improvement, we did make clear what the implications of not de-delegating those funds would be, which would ultimately cause a pressure to the council's funding and therefore require a reduction in that service to bring it back to affordability. It wouldn't otherwise continue at the current level because the funding wouldn't be there to support it. So some of those increases, well, we've just gone through the consultation, the reason for the increase in educational psychology. I think likewise, so partly that's around pay awards, etc. And then on school improvement, it's been to deliver the new school improvement framework, which was shared with primary schools and secondaries in terms of that new offer. So the funding would deliver that model. If not delegated, we would need to reconsider the structure of that service.
Sorry.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
You know,
yeah, just to come back.
I mean, I don't know whether properly there's a way in which we could talk about the information outside this meeting and make a decision one way or another before January. Because I mean, I'm not saying, you know, but it's just helpful to us in terms of being able to plan the service.
I mean, it seems to me that the fact that even using these numbers, that we're basically 50-50 on these services, it suggests that there is not confidence about what is being offered to schools. So, you know, I think, you know, okay, it's a sort of like a Brexit deal, isn't it? It's quite close, but maybe it can be discussed a bit more.
Okay, I mean, Hannah's made a suggestion which might be, if there was a discussion could take place offline out of the meeting.
Yeah. And I think we were in a very similar position with this last year. And last year we did ask for much more clarification on the school improvement service, which I know we have had more clarification this year, but we did have to have another meeting outside of this meeting last year, and it probably would be sensible to do that.
Fine.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Okay.
That would be really helpful. Thank you.
I just want conscious of the secondary.
Yeah, we not done that yet. Follow the agenda.
Sorry.
Now we're going to move on to secondary. Right, well, all those who are going to be voting on secondary, please indicate who that is.
It's very. We're now in school. Let's go for a proper.
Right, there were 7 items. Do you want to say your piece on each of those?
We had a really good process last year, which was that I came to the meeting, got the information that I needed. I've had a pre-conversation with Ed from St Bernadette, and I think by Monday, next week Monday, we could get a definitive decision back to you. So I would like to request just being able to fulfil due process, making it unanimous, or we to be really clear that is a joint representative of secondaries. So would Monday be permissible?
It'll be Monday the 2nd.
Monday the 2nd, end of play Monday the 2nd.
As long as the chair and the form are happy with it, I think it's an issue.
Okay. Any comments, observations?
And I think where we've got to on the primaries, that it would be odd not to say. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think we're at any other business. Vic, was there any other things that you wanted to bring to the forum's attention?
No, not from me, no.
Okay. Any other business? Sorry? Oh, right. Remind me, the next meeting, which is also in person, and that's in 15th January, Wednesday the 15th of January. Oh yes, okay, right, thank you. So, notwithstanding any particular guidance we've got, we're going to take a quick vote on whether you are happy or unhappy for the film of this meeting to go out in public domain. So, voting happy. Stick your hands right up.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Councillor, have you got your hand up for this one?
Yeah, I need to see the documentation that says we can't, that this can't happen.
Sorry.
I'm not
No,
convinced.
it's because you're picking your bag up. I didn't know what
Yeah.
you were doing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay.
Did you say 4?
And then I'm happy with that.
Obviously, people who arrive late might not know what they're voting for.
Okay. There's the debate that we need to resolve, which whether the meeting can be filmed and released, and it's unclear. But for information purposes, I was wanting to take a vote on that. So let us do that vote now. We've done.
So it's been filmed to go onto YouTube, but there's a debate at the start about whether that's in line with the rules or not. So we decided we would let it be filmed, and then we'd see who was happy with it being shared, and then the local authority will go off and get a proper answer as to whether this gentleman can or can't put it in the public domain.
Absolutely.
Because obviously if we didn't film it, then it's too late for us to have the right to
Okay,
thank you.
So did we get against? So the majority is 4. So can I say we don't actually need to. It would be useful to get it, but we don't actually need it because everybody's comfortable with it. Yep. Okay. Any more for any more? I've got you to 5:30. Sorry about that.
That's 3 minutes. I haven't rung the bell yet.
All right. Thank you very much. Happy Christmas, everybody.